the last video, we saw that against Olavo's presentation, what's distinctive about Aristotelian philosophy of nature is that, yes, we can have science of nature, and not preserving the empirical as a domain of fuzziness and uncertainty. No. There are things that we can't know. We can't know everything, but there is science. And that's what's the new and that's what's exciting about Aristotle's physics and his physical texts, right? There is actual science. If you pick up on the heavens, it's one argument after another about how the world has to be. We ended by pointing out that it seems that Olavo is right about Nous in Aristotle. So it seems that the ultimate object of Nous is this first unmoved mover who is pure thinking, who is beyond the natural world. Now, Proclus sheds light on Aristotle's theory of the unmoved mover. Indeed, if Aristotle just tells us that there is this pure thought, Proclus's theory tries to tell us what this thought is thinking, which is left very vague by Aristotle. He only says that it's something in it, or that it's something identical with it, but doesn't say what it's thinking. And to get there, we need to start with something much more basic, something that Aristotle already talked about, which is about lifespans. Right? So Aristotle saw that it's part of the nature of a living being how long it lives. Right? It's not just something that's determined by outside circumstances. Rather, if a living being has bones that last a certain amount of time and teeth that are sharp for a certain amount of time, this is because it belongs to the nature of that living being to live for a certain amount of time. Right? The body is designed as an instrument that will last so many years, or maybe so many hours. Right? And he talks about how living beings naturally want to be measured according to natural periods, according to the periods of the heavenly bodies. Right? And this wanting to be measured for Aristotle is just this idea that they have a certain intrinsic norm for how long they last. So, for instance, a human being gestates for 7 or 9 months. Both numbers show up in antiquity, and will live ideally up to around 75, also a number that shows up in antiquity. So Aristotle had already observed this. Now, Proclus will call these intrinsic measures of beings the particular times of each thing. So he already has this idea that we have, so to speak, biological clocks. Each living being has its own time, has its own temporal form that's ticking away and that structures the world for it. So this time of each thing includes not only how long it will live, but also the structure of its life. So whether it has diurnal cycles, whether it has monthly cycles, yearly cycles, and so on. Okay. Now, Proclus generalizes, and he says, well, actually, everything has a time, not just living beings. You see that the heavenly bodies, well, they're alive because they keep moving, and they follow perfect orbit, so they have their periods. Inanimate things, like the elements, they follow their cycles, like the water's cycle, the repetitions in the weather. And so that shows that there's a natural time for these things. Even if you go to a craftsman and you buy a cloak, he'll be able to say, this should last so long, right? If you buy a chair, this will last so long. Things have expiry dates, so to speak. And just in case someone still has doubts, he says, look, we consult oracles. If things did not have in their nature a certain amount of time for how long they should last, then we wouldn't have knowledge of the future. So that's his Hail Mary last argument. But it's also true, and Proclus again follows Aristotle in saying that the many different species don't come from each other and each of them is perpetual. However, how can you maintain that each of them in perpetuity if each of them is following its own rhythms, right? How can you unite all these rhythms? How can you synchronize, coordinate between all the particular times? Proclus' solution is that there must be one great time, one great plan for the whole world. So just as for a human being, it has a lifespan that says that it has a daily rhythms and monthly rhythms, and that it will last so long, so also the whole world is like a living being. And it also has mega cycles of change that down here reflect in weather cycles and moments when certain things are dry and certain areas are wet, and then there are other periods when the continents and the seas are reversed. Every part of the world is at one time under the sea and another time dry. This is part of the whole life cycle of the earth. And there are also cycles in human events, in wars, and all these cycles that astrology teaches us according to Proclus. So there's this grand cycle, which he calls the great year, but which isn't just like the year, the cycle of the sun. And it's different from that because it includes all the other cycles in it. And it's really the time of the world. And whereas all the particular times are properties of the beings that have them, and especially here thinking about the beings that come to be and cease to be, like individual human beings, so my lifespan is part of me. When I die, that lifespan will be over, will no longer exist. The plan of the world exists prior to every change, because it is the plan for all the changes in the world. And it is the plan that ensures that all the different forms of the world, all the different species will always exist. So it is not in time at all. It is beyond the world. It is eternal. And this is time itself, right? And this is, for Proclus, the first unmoved mover. You want to know what the content of the first unmoved mover is? It's the plan of the world. It is, as it were, the principle of deductive astrology, right? That one essence of the now from which you could derive at every now what the world is supposed to be like at that moment. The way that, say, from the essence of the point you get all of geometry. So that is the first unmoved mover. And you see that Proclus has reasoned in an entirely analogous way to Aristotle, for Aristotle also reaches the first unmoved mover through the question of the continuity of the species. Proclus has just given the question more content, because he's asked not only how can the many species be continuous in time, but how can their many cycles be coordinated and harmonized together, which is required by the very theory of the perpetuity of the species that Aristotle also accepts. So Proclus' theory of time is really a deepening and a further articulation of Aristotle's theory. And a result of it is that Aristotle used his Nous to know time itself. He was not going beyond the material world in any essential way. He went from the world to the principle of the world, but he did not go beyond studying the natural world at all, right? And this is part of Proclus's point, that the Aristotelian theology will only take you so far. It will only take you to this rather minor god that is time. And it does not even take you to the engineer of the world, responsible for the structure of the world, called the demiurge in Plato's Timaeus. It does not take you to higher gods that are responsible for the structure of thought or the structure of being, right? It is really just theology that will take you to the principles of the cosmos and nothing beyond that. So, contrary to the narrative that it's part of the great downfall of modernity that people started turning their intellectual intuition to natural phenomenon, we see from Proclus's philosophy of time that the content of the great Aristotelian philosophy of nature, held up as a model in this narrative by Olavo as a contrast to using your nous to understand the natural world, was actually about nothing other than time. And this is actually a very central point to Olavo's narrative about empire and about the development of the idea of empire in the West. It's about how, starting with this turn of nous towards the natural world, towards space and time, you start to get to these oppositions between historicism and naturalism, and that we're caught in this zigzag between these opposites because we're no longer directing our nous towards its proper object, and this is actually clouding our minds by using it to study the wrong things. This falls entirely. There is not a leg for this theory to stand on once we understand just how naturalistic already and still the Aristotelian theory is. And furthermore, this is actually something that I could speak much more about as well. It's also another aspect that shows how it is not true that Christianity is merely Platonism for the masses. Right? This is a Foglinian idea that Olavo inherits, where Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were these esoteric defendants of the rights of individual consciousness, or individual conscience. That, however, is smothered by the pagan and collectivistic nature of the polytheistic societies. And it is only Christianity that comes and really defends the individual and gives birth to the individual conscience and the individual moral conscience, able to face the whole world. So this idea that this secret of the philosophers was revealed to all mankind depends on the idea that the object of Aristotle's thinking and of Plato's thinking is the same object that was revealed then later by the Christians. This fails on a number of counts, and one of them really is about how much Aristotle's interested in the gods of the world, and he is really interested in investigating the Greek piety that he shared in. This video is part of a series on Proclus' philosophy of time. If you're curious to learn more, I will be teaching a course on Proclus' philosophy of time called Time and the Gods, coming up in November and December. It will take place Sunday afternoons, and you can find a link below to enroll in the course. Thanks.